This is the night the Irish faithful have waited for since that night in Dallas almost 2 years ago. Vaunted Clemson, the #1 team in the land, has arrived in the Bend. And tonight, Notre Dame finally gets its chance to avenge that cotton calamity.
But tonight also comes with a major wrinkle none of us could have dreamed of on that December night. Trevor Lawrence, Clemson's and college football's marquee player, tested positive for the coronavirus. He will not play.
And while that may take a little luster off as the lights come on at Notre Dame Stadium, there is still plenty of drama beginning to build inside this favorable place.
Games like this one take us back to classics on the sod below. Games known for green jerseys and iconic t-shirt slogans, for passes batted down at the goal line and QBs pushed across it. Games of the century we still vividly recall decades later.
But matchups like this one also remind us of some not so pleasant recent history. Multiple blowouts on the big stage, major disappointments in the eyes of the country on the Irish.
So what will this year's Irish give us tonight? A game you'll tell your kids and grandkids about decades from now, or another stinker to forget about?
The countdown to that answer on the night we've waited so long for begins now.
Live under the lights of Notre Dame Stadium, this is 16 News Now's Countdown to Kickoff.
You are looking live inside Notre Dame Stadium, where the #1 Clemson Tigers and the #4 Fighting Irish meet tonight in the biggest game in this building in 15 years.
Good evening and welcome into 16 News Now's Countdown to Kickoff. I'm Mark Skoll Jr.
And I'm WHME Sports Director Chuck Freeby. Notre Dame has filled its history with wins over #1 teams, from era's bowl game upsets of Texas and Alabama in the 70s to toppling Florida State on this field in 1993. But that was 27 years ago. Notre Dame's last national championship was 32 years ago. Those events begin to look like museum pieces for folks.
So tonight is a chance for Notre Dame to literally wake up the echoes. This is a huge game for the Irish coaches and players, and for Notre Dame, and for college football.
We're super excited about this opportunity this week. This is, college football at its best.
This is what we come to Notre Dame for. We come to Notre Dame to play top games like this, to play Clemson, to play the best teams in the nation.
We haven't had many of these opportunities at home. It's only the second time we've played a top 10 team at home. So last time we did, we took it to Stanford pretty good. Let's go. Let's play the same way against Clemson.
You can't hide it. It is a big game. You know, a lot of people want to say it's just another game. Well, it is just another game, but you don't want to hide the elephant in the room.
Another elephant in the room is the fact that Heisman frontrunner and likely #1 overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, Clemson starting quarterback Trevor Lawrence, is out tonight after testing positive for COVID-19.
Lawrence tested positive for the virus Wednesday, October 28th, and had to go into the ACC's required 10-day isolation. In isolation, Lawrence had been participating in meetings and talking to the other Clemson quarterbacks via Zoom.
He was able to join the team at the end of the week, but can't play due to the cardiovascular tests that are required for players to return to action. It's a bummer, but the rules are in place to keep the players safe.
There's protocols for a reason, because you want to make sure when you do come back, you do it in the safest possible way. There's measures in place to make sure that these young people are safely put back into play.
When I heard he got the virus, the first thing you think of is, hope he's okay. Hope he doesn't have, any lingering effects that affects him. He's the best player in college football. Then after that, you're like, well, the virus is indiscriminate. It doesn't care. The virus is going to do what the virus does.
The virus has Lawrence out tonight, but he has been cleared to be on the sidelines. Sweeney says Trevor will be Coach Lawrence tonight as he helps the Clemson offense.
Lawrence's absence is the topic of tonight's Lock Monday Auto Group Irish fan poll on WNDU.com.
We asked you, would a Notre Dame win tonight mean less with Trevor Lawrence out? Right now, 54% of you say yes, 46% say no. There is still plenty of time to vote in the Lock Monday Auto Group Irish fan poll on WNDU.com. We will have the final results around 6:50.
Now, the last time Notre Dame and Clemson played, Lawrence was the star of the show, and it was another tough loss for Notre Dame on the national stage.
The Irish fell 30-3 that day in Dallas, but Kelly's mood was different after that game than following the 2013 title game against Alabama. He felt like his Irish were just 4 big plays and a Julian Love injury away from taking down the Tigers. After the loss, Kelly said his team was on the verge of something special.
They put us on the brink. And that the next group now knows that journey and that path and how to get there. It's their job now to see us there and through it and get us to a national championship.
Since that game, Kelly has made it very clear Notre Dame is 17-2 and riding high on an FBF's leading 12-game win streak. And for the past couple of weeks, he's really talked about preparing for Clemson.
But now with Clemson here, the Irish head coach doesn't seem too worried about the #1 team in the country marching in. Let's bring in the countdowns. Megan Smedley from the studio with more on Kelly's mood this week.
Yeah, Clemson is the #1 team in the country with a pair of national titles in the last 5 years, but Brian Kelly believes that his team and his program deserve respect too. Kelly pointed out that Notre Dame is 29-3 in its last 32 games. They've won 22 straight games at home and have a 12-game winning streak. He says that this game does not decide the season for them, but because if they beat Clemson but lose to Boston College next week, then the Clemson win wouldn't mean anything.
We can't be overly emotional about this football game and lose sight of the fact that we've got 5 more games to play as well. I mean, there's a lot of football still left out. So we can't empty the tank and say, hey, we beat Clemson, we've arrived. No, we haven't. You know, we've got to take this game as an important game. It's the #1 team in the country. You better play really well against a really good Clemson football team. And then get ready to move on and play a BC team on the road. That's really good too.
Kelly says yet again that it's important that the team raises its compete level on Saturdays and that they continue to do so. So guys, 29-3 is a pretty darn good record, but those 3 losses aren't fluke losses.
Well, and Mark, that's the reason Brian Kelly is getting these kinds of questions, because quite frankly, his team has underperformed in big games. In fact, Notre Dame in their last 20 against top 5, 1-19.
You look at the past 3 years, you look at the loss to Miami in 2017, there are no excuses there. Last year against Michigan, blowout in Ann Arbor in the monsoon. Obviously, you can say the weather could have been a factor, but Michigan was also playing in that weather too. I know a lot of people like to point out the Georgia games, but both of those games were really close. I think Notre Dame is on the verge of something special, but we'll see if Brian Kelly and Notre Dame are able to get that monkey off their back tonight. So back to this big game where so much of the college football world's attention is rightfully on the absence of Trevor Lawrence. He's far from the only missing Tiger.
That's for sure. 3 defensive starters. Defensive tackle Tyler Davis, linebackers James Skalski and Mike Jones Jr. They're all hurt. They're not going to play.
And Clemson defensive end Xavier Thomas will miss the first half after he was tossed during the second half of the Tigers game with Boston College last week. He was flagged for targeting on this play. Thomas has battled back from a COVID-19 diagnosis this spring, which left his season in doubt at one point.
Now the Irish also have a defender who will miss the first half after a targeting ejection last week. Maris Leofau got that flag in the second half against Georgia Tech, so he won't be available until the second half tonight.
And here's a look at the other Irish inactives tonight. The board empty. Quite a change from a few weeks ago.
Wow. That is something, especially in this era of COVID, that Notre Dame has been able to weather that storm and come out of that empty. Hey, the countdown's just getting started on this beautiful November night.
Up next, the comeback hit is back on the countdown. We catch up with Joe Montana, hear from the Irish legend about that green jersey game, and so much more from his time here on campus.
And here's our first countdown trivia test of the evening. Montana's Irish also faced the Tigers. So what other future NFL quarterback led Clemson against Notre Dame in 1977? The answer comes when the countdown rolls back in 2 minutes.
Here is your Countdown to Kickoff trivia answer.
Steve Fuller was Clemson's quarterback when the Tigers took on Notre Dame and Joe Montana in 1977. The Irish got the win that day in Death Valley, fittingly in comeback fashion, 21-17. Fuller would later be picked in the first round of the NFL draft. Montana was only a third-round pick. Fuller eventually ended up as the backup on the 1985 Bears, complete with his own star turn in the Super Bowl Shuffle.
Now to that other quarterback on the field in Death Valley on that November day.
That's right, you're too young for the Super Bowl Shuffle. We start our countdown conversation with Joe Montana with his memories of a game for the ages a few weeks earlier.
This Clemson-Notre Dame game that's coming up, we want to talk to you about. It's probably the biggest game at Notre Dame Stadium since the Bush Push game of 2005, but you played in a pretty big game at the stadium against USC in '77. What are your memories of that green jersey game and the hype that led up to it?
Yeah, well, there was always hype, back then with us in USC. And I don't know, there was something special about this week. And it was the weirdest things that was going on for the longest time before the captains were let in on what was happening. And because Devine kept talking about green this and green that. And, we went to warm up and we had green stripes on our socks and we were all trying to figure out, well, okay, we get the green in the Irish, but we're wearing blue. And, everybody was shocked. And when we went back inside and green jerseys were there, and just the excitement that filled the locker room over something so simple that made such a big impact on the team. That day we tried to get Coach Devine to let us. Some of the students had made a Trojan horse. They wheeled into the stadium, and we were trying to get the captains to go in there and come out for the coin toss, but he ixnayed that one quickly.
Now, Joe, you've played in countless games of this type of magnitude before. What's the key to staying locked in, staying in the zone when all the eyes of the country are on you?
Well, usually the coach kind of helps you with a lot of that. That keeps you busy. And, the busier you are, the more you concentrate on football. But also at some point in time, he has to find ways to, ease the tension throughout. When we were playing, in big games that were coming up, whether it was back in Notre Dame or here, there's always ends up, practice was tense and, somebody makes a mistake or somebody accidentally falls and gets into somebody's legs, and then there's fights, and then there's because everybody just wants the game to play right now and are looking forward to it. And so he also has to find a way to, ease some tension from them as they go into that game.
Joe, how close do you think this Notre Dame team is to pulling off a championship season?
Well, I think we're going to find out here, you don't want to let Alabama happen all over again when you get into there, but I think you learn a lesson from there. But also at the same time, I think they're a lot more competitive with this team than they were at that point in time.
More with Joe, including why you'll see him in a new role during the game broadcast tonight on NBC in a little more than 20 minutes.
And up next, where does this game stack up in the Brian Kelly era? Tim O'Malley and Tim Priester answer that. Plus, if Trevor Lawrence's absence would taint an Irish win when the countdown rolls back in 2 minutes.
The countdown is back live inside Notre Dame Stadium on an absolutely incredible November night. Number 1 Clemson and number 4 Notre Dame are just over an hour away from kickoff, and the weather couldn't be any better for this long-awaited clash.
This game is like the last drops of a bottle of ketchup. We have waited in anticipation for this night for the entire season, really since the 2020 schedule was released a few years ago.
And that is where we start off this Irish Illustrated Report.
All right, fellas, huge game on Saturday, top 5 matchup. It's a game we've been talking about what seems like forever at this point. Tim O'Malley, just how big is this game for Notre Dame?
Yeah, a win is easily the biggest game in the Brian Kelly era. You have to go back to 2012 to argue something differently. And a loss is kind of crippling. Honestly, I know they get to play them again if they win out, and everybody assumes they would win out. That might not work out, but it'll be a lot harder to beat Clemson in Charlotte with Trevor Lawrence and some healthy defensive players up the middle than it is in your home stadium where things are set up for you. I know the crowd and the weather that everybody was praying for isn't coming, but Notre Dame has been pointing this game for, as we know, at least 3 weeks. This is something they have invested a lot more time in. It is a measuring stick, no matter what Brian Kelly says, and it's, he's 11 years in, so his most important game was the playoff game and the championship loss, but this is his most important regular season game ever. It's number 1 versus number 4 in November.
You're lucky he's not watching this. He'd snap that measuring stick right over your head, O'Malley. After weeks of hyping this game up, he sits there this week and tries to downplay it. What's up with that?
Yeah, there were 7 questions about Clemson and how much better Clemson is than Notre Dame, and is it a measuring stick, and how come you always lose a game that you should – how come you always don't show up once a year? You're thinking of Miami, you're thinking of Michigan, you're thinking of Clemson. And I don't think he wanted to hear about it because this is a week where he wants to be talking about their wins rather than their losses. Now, downplaying this game is ridiculous. It's been done before. He's downplayed Michigan before. I don't mean last year, but he has downplayed some of the rivalry games before. But I get his point. He doesn't want to talk to the media about why they stunk at Michigan last year, and I don't blame him for that. But I think if he just would have handled it more along the lines of, yeah, it's a measuring stick. Clemson's number 1. They won the national title 2 years ago, and we lost to them. I think that would have probably diffused the entire situation, and it also would have been the truth.
Tim Priester, it's our fan poll question. Would a Notre Dame win mean less without Trevor Lawrence playing?
It depends who's making that judgment. Certainly there will be fans that will say it doesn't mean anything until they play him again on December 19th in Charlotte. And the media would definitely, certain segments of the media would definitely say it would mean less. But I mean, in terms of how Notre Dame would view it, how Notre Dame should view it, and really how the national media should view it, the situation is what it is. I realize COVID's a different situation. It's not like an injury, but it's part of 2020. So it is what it is. As O'Malley was saying, it's a huge football game. It's the biggest football game in the regular season that Notre Dame has played under Brian Kelly, and it doesn't matter how you win it as long as you win it. So whoever wants to make that judgment, they're entitled to that. But a win over number 1 is truly significant.
Friends, you can subscribe to Irish Illustrated. It's the number 1 source for Notre Dame sports online. Just head to irishillustrated.com, click on join, and find the best plan for you.
And up next, we head off the field for some Leprechaun stories. You'll meet a few of the men who donned the derby and grew the beard when the countdown continues in 2 minutes. Back on the countdown, where on nights like this one, Notre Dame history and beloved Irish traditions bubble to the surface.
And we bring in the countdown's Lindsay Stone. Lindsay, you have the story of 4 men who knows what this place means to so many very well.
Chuck, we know college mascots come in all shapes and sizes. We've got Bevo, the 1,800-pound steer representing the Texas Longhorns. Then we've got the humanized Buckeye representing Ohio State. But nothing quite compares to the Notre Dame Leprechaun. Only few have achieved the honor of becoming a Leprechaun. And for those in that elite club, they say it really is the honor of a lifetime. You know the costume. You know the cheers. But do you really know the Leprechaun?
It embodies so much of what so many people see and value and love about Notre Dame.
Anywhere I went, it's just like, are you the Leprechaun?
The Leprechaun was named the official mascot of Notre Dame in 1965, and only a handful of individuals have been lucky enough to don the signature uniform.
It's an incredible honor, and it's an incredible responsibility.
Michael Brown, Mike Malcaluso, Randy Kelly, and James Walter Keating are all part of a legacy few people are. They're Notre Dame Leprechauns.
You don't know what you're about to get yourself into.
It was a lot less controlled in a lot of ways. I would know people I could go visit in the stands that would have brought in a flask that could help warm me up on a particularly cold football Saturday.
Taking on the coveted role is a big task.
In addition to it being so exciting and thrilling, it was very intimidating. You know, you're also subject to the highs and lows of the athletics.
There were tough times. We had 4 weeks in a row of away games, and the closest one was New York City. It really did not help my GPA, I gotta tell you.
The balancing act of being a student and the Leprechaun comes with a fair share of criticism.
Unique to the Leprechaun in general is the fact that we are not hidden by a big head. I feel for the guys now because I think the pressure is probably even greater.
But it also makes for some memorable moments.
They all have stories, let me tell you.
We got to be on Regis's show when we were out in New York for the basketball championship.
Lily Tomlin was in town one weekend. She called us and said, I've always wanted to be a cheerleader. Could I come and attend your pep rally as a cheerleader?
While the four friends have hung up the Leprechaun suit, they haven't gone far from the glimmer of the Golden Dome.
People talk about the campus and the Golden Dome and the grotto, but at the end of the day, it's the people, it's the community, it's the family.
There are currently 6 former Notre Dame Leprechauns still living here in South Bend. They say they just can't go far from the glimmer of this gorgeous Golden Dome. But Chuck and Mark, it really all comes down to how amazing the people here are.
And there's also one who's now a Catholic priest in Fort Wayne, so you never know where it's going to lead you. Thanks, Lindsay. Up next, we turn our attention to the man who will play quarterback tonight for Clemson.
DJ Uiagalelei has been thrown into the spotlight with Trevor Lawrence out. How he's handling it starts our quick hits on the countdown when we return in 2 minutes.
Live under the lights of Notre Dame Stadium, this is 16 News Now's Countdown to Kickoff.
Dabo Swinney's #1 ranked Clemson Tigers are here at Notre Dame Stadium for one of college football's biggest showdowns of the 2020 season. His Tigers and Brian Kelly's #4 Fighting Irish are set for a tilt that could have major playoff implications. Back inside the countdown with WHME Sports Director Chuck Freeby, I'm Mark Stoll Jr.
And let's get right to quick hits on the countdown. Megan and Lindsay are back for the relay, but let's get out of the blocks quickly with the Tigers' starting quarterback last weekend against Boston College. The Clemson true freshman DJ Uiagalelei made his first career collegiate start.
And no one was more proud of the true freshman quarterback than his parents, Dave and Tausha. DJ's parents sacrificed a lot for their son. They moved from America's Samoa to California to provide better opportunities for their kids. Dad worked as a security guard around the clock while mom became a surrogate mother 6 times over so they could afford paying for DJ's travel teams. DJ's parents are so proud of him and love seeing his hard work pay off. DJ says they are his why on the field.
It was hard for them, like paying for different training stuff, paying for like travel ball, football, and stuff like that. Some days, you know, it wouldn't be a lot to eat sometimes, but they always make it work because they always want me and my brother to just be able to pursue our athletic career and just whatever they want. They always want to be there for us, and they would make sacrifices that they would do for us that I know a lot of people wouldn't do.
DJ's dad is so supportive that DJ had to block him on Twitter. He's done so since his sophomore year of high school. Sounds weird, but Big Dave posts so much about how good his son is at football that DJ had to mute him so he could keep a level head. Megan, let's now go from the starting QB to the Tigers' star running back.
Well, Mark, the Fighting Irish will also have to handle the ACC's leading rusher in Travis Etienne. Etienne became the ACC's all-time leading rusher during last week's game against Boston College. He now has 4,612 rushing yards throughout his time at Clemson. Etienne also became the first player in FBS history to score either a rushing or a receiving touchdown in 42 games. He says he's happy he became a part of history, but when he did, the Tigers were still trailing last week, so he was more focused on getting the win.
It was just great just to be there for my teammates, knowing they need me, just being able to just be someone they can rely on, play in and play out, and just go out there and just after that fumble, just have the adversity to fight back, keep my head up, keep strong, keep leading those guys, and just come out there and get the win. During the season, we're going to reflect on these games after the season's over with, but right now we just got that tunnel vision headed to the next one.
And after dealing with cramps earlier this season because he only ate Frosted Flakes, Etienne has been having a full balanced breakfast before games now. So Chuck, how do the Irish plan on slowing down the now well-fed Etienne?
Well, Megan, I'm glad I don't have to come up with the answers to that question. That task is left to Clark Lee and the Irish defense. There are a couple of things Notre Dame has to be aware of here. Yes, he's the ACC's all-time leading rusher, but more and more, Dabo Swinney is using Etienne as a receiver, either lined up at the line of scrimmage or wheeling out of the backfield. Secondly, in games where Clemson has not had Trevor Lawrence, they have really amped up the usage of Etienne. Both times he's gone from 150 yards per game to over 200. So just how do the Irish handle this monster?
he's the complete package. When you're looking up complete running back in the dictionary, his picture and name should be there because that's who he is.
He's a very elusive guy, very fast guy. So you want to contain him in the best possible way that you can. And that'll be one of our focuses this week.
And in case you're wondering, Etienne gashed the Irish for 109 yards in the Cotton Bowl just 2 years ago. But as good as Etienne is, Lindsey Stone, the better overall rushing offense today is with the home team.
Chuck, the Irish enter this contest a lot more prepared in the backfield than they were the last time they faced Clemson, and a big reason for that is Kyren Williams. This kid has had himself a year. He's rushed for 600 yards and had 7 touchdowns, but he is not the only threat that Clemson needs to keep an eye on tonight. Freshman Tyree is one of the fastest men on the field. He's already rushed for 264 yards this season, while Sibo Flemister broke the 100-yard barrier against South Florida. So there is certainly some depth. While those Irish running backs say the offensive line is a big part of their success.
I guess it's a running back you dream of, when you got an offensive line like the one we have where they're moving the line of scrimmage every single run. And when you believe that you can stay patient, you can tiptoe behind the line and still be able to find what hole you get to the hole you need to go to. That's when you know you have a good offensive line. And then whenever we have that, us running backs, we cherish that. I think we all work off each other. We all bring a different skill to the table.
And so far this season, Notre Dame has rushed for 1,386 yards. Chuck and Mark, I think it's a safe bet to say they will be adding more to that number here tonight, but the big question is, by just how much?
The more the better for the Irish. Ahead on the countdown, we continue our conversation with the Irish legend Joe Montana. He gives us some insight on his teammates, including why he probably won't end up in Ken McAfee's dental chair.
And here is another countdown trivia test. If Dabo Swinney wins tonight, he'll be 3-0 against the Irish. So who was the last college football head coach to win his first 3 games against Notre Dame? The answer when the countdown returns in 2 minutes.
Here is your Countdown to Kickoff trivia answer.
The last head coach to win his first 3 games against Notre Dame was Nick Saban. Saban did it in 1997, 98, and 99 when he led the Michigan State Spartans. Of course, he also has another rather memorable, or maybe for many of you, forgettable win against the Irish, leading Alabama in the 2013 BCS National Championship game.
Want to give a hat tip to our friend Clemson's retired and legendary SID and Notre Dame alum Tim Beret for that one. By the way, there were 3 other coaches, all Hall of Famers, who started 3-0 against the Irish. You've got Amos Alonzo Stagg, Jimmy Johnson, and Ara Parsegan when he was coaching at Northwestern.
Now back to a man recruited by Ara at Notre Dame more than a decade later, Joe Montana. We continue our conversation with some stories about his Irish teammates.
Hey, Joe, when you were at Notre Dame, obviously Dan Devine was the coach. You played with a lot of characters. I think of guys like Dave Huffman and Ken McAfee, Chris Haynes. What are some of the funnier memories that you have of your time at Notre Dame?
Oh, no, we had a great group of players, while I was there. I think when I first got there, too, and we had a monster team. When I walked into that locker room, for the first time, seeing that the size of our defense, geez, I still stay in touch with one of my guys I talk to all the time. There were a lot of laughs. There were a lot of characters, the whole Rudy thing took place for us. And our guys carried him off being funny. And I don't know how to explain it. It just, it brings, I can't stop smiling thinking about the days back then when I think about, especially, McAfee, and you look at, he ends up wanting to be a dentist, and his fingers were twice my size, and they were all crooked. And I'm like, who's going to let you put those things in somebody's mouth? Give me a break. We had fun.
Joe, this season, Guinness became the official beer of Notre Dame football, and they chose you as the national ambassador. They're going to be airing your ad for the first time during the Clemson game. What drew you to this partnership?
Well, when you look at the partnership, between Guinness and Notre Dame. I think it just makes total sense when you look at the values that they have, the traditions that are there, their want right now to the future and to making it better. It seems like for me it's a no-brainer. And then it's funny, I fell in love with Guinness. Believe it or not, we were in Ireland, in Dublin, with our horse trainers. We're looking to buy some jumping horses over there and bring them back for the kids who were jumping, and bring back a couple you could sell to pay for the trip. So went out there, and he went and ordered the beers, and he came back and didn't have them. I go, what are you doing? He goes, well, you got to wait for it. It takes time. This takes time. And sort of kind of leads right into the first commercial that we're doing. And, but it was so different. And every day after that we were there, I'm going, Charlie, isn't it time for a pint? Let's go.
Well, Joe, when you sit there today with your Guinness and watch Notre Dame and Clemson, maybe 2 Guinness, who knows? What do you think the final score of this Notre Dame-Clemson game will be?
You know what's so funny is, like, you look at these games and everybody's going, wow, this is going to be a high-scoring game. And then what it ends up being, like 21 to 17. It's like crazy. I don't know. It could go either way. I think the lower the score, the better it is for Notre Dame.
I agree with him up on that one. Up next on the countdown, we turn to the man who now has the job that Joe Montana once did.
The reviews on Ian Book sure have been mixed so far this season. What he's doing to change that, and a look at some all-time Irish stat lists he's continuing to climb. The countdown returns in 2 minutes. Back on the countdown, where we've talked a lot about the longtime starting quarterback not playing tonight. Now to the one you will see. Trevor Lawrence and Ian Book have had a similar journey, both coming in as midseason replacements back in 2018.
And as Lawrence skyrocketed to a potential #1 pick, Book has faced constant criticism. The countdown's Megan Smedley joins us now with how Notre Dame's leader is working to silence the critics.
Being the quarterback at Notre Dame is arguably one of the hardest jobs in college football. And for Ian Book, his focus is on staying level-headed.
Great quarterback, so accurate. He's a winner.
He's a winner. He wins football games. I said he hasn't lost at home. When the game's on the line, you can count on Ian Book to come up and make big plays for us. And that's a good feeling to have.
And when he does, Book is 26-3 as a starter. But this season, there's been issues with his consistency as he gets used to a new receiving core.
Worked on a lot of things. One of the main things was just timing and knowing where guys will be at the right time, and I've been able to get better at that every week. And I just feel more comfortable with those guys out in the perimeter, just putting in more reps, day in and day out. And the other one was just bringing juice to this offense.
When the receivers aren't available, Book takes things into his own hands, or should we say legs. He's now second all-time in Irish history for quarterback rushing yards.
It's part of the game that I bring to the table, and I have a lot of pride in it. I want to be able to, if something's not there, it's not looking right or collapsing, I want to be able to, get out of my own way and go get the first down and keep the drive alive. So it's part of my game.
Book has quietly climbed up the Irish charts. He's second all-time in touchdown passes, second all-time in total offensive yards, and third in winning percentage as a starter, something his opponents and his teammates notice.
He's a great player. He's savvy. He's instinctive. He can make the throws. He's a really good runner.
I love him as a quarterback, and I think he's a damn good football player.
Now past the halfway point in the season, Book seems to be on the rise. Just look at last week's Georgia Tech game.
His timing was really good. He shortened up his drop a little bit. He was tighter on his drop. Really liked his efficiency today. And we'd like to see a couple more here and there, but it was a really good day for him. One that we can continue to build off of.
Just in time for Clemson.
With the team, we're ascending at the right time. I feel like my game's starting to ascend, and it needs to keep doing the same thing.
Now in the Cotton Bowl 2 years ago, Book was 17 for 34 with just 160 yards against Clemson. He, of course, hopes to put up better numbers tonight. And a reminder, when President-elect Biden addresses the nation tonight around 8 p.m., coverage of the Notre Dame-Clemson game will temporarily move to the USA Network. You see USA channels on some local cable and satellite providers right now on your screen. And once the speech is over, the game will resume on NBC, while the countdown resumes in just 2 minutes.
It's been a week for counting votes, and we've tallied yours in this week's Lock Monday Auto Group Irish fan poll on WNDU.com.
We asked you, would a Notre Dame win tonight mean less with Trevor Lawrence out? 53% of you told us yes. No votes added up to 47%. Thank you for voting in the Lock Money Auto Group Irish fan poll on WNDU.com.
Well, we've talked a lot about the Clemson offense tonight, but how much will the Tigers' much-heralded defensive coordinator stack up against the Irish offensive boss?
That's where we pick up the Irish Illustrated Report.
TP, Brent Venables is one of the top defensive coordinators in all of college football. Tommy Rees is a rookie offensive coordinator. How critical is this off-the-field matchup during this game?
It's huge, and certainly the difference in experience plays a role in this, and how could it not? But having said that, I don't think Tommy Rees is going to be overwhelmed by what Brent Venables wants to do from the standpoint he's seen it, he understands it, he knows what he needs to call, he knows what his players need to do. The tricky part, the difficult part, and this is part of being an offensive coordinator and owning it, is you got to get your players to execute it. And it's difficult. Now, this isn't as great of a Clemson defense as we've seen, so the buttons that Brent Venables pushes aren't quite as automatic as they were with a guy like Isaiah Simmons, that freak running around out there. So it's a great matchup.
Tim O'Malley, after the 30-3 loss in the Cotton Bowl, Brian Kelly still said his team was on the brink of winning a national championship. How much closer is Notre Dame to winning its first title since 1988 than they were that day in Dallas?
You know, I think Clemson has come back, and Alabama has come back from where they were. That's one of the greatest national champions of all time in Clemson, considering how they absolutely blitzed Alabama, who we thought was one of the greatest regular season teams of all time because they finally had a top offense to go with their always great defense. I think those teams have come back a little. I actually think the Notre Dame 2018 team was better than this team, though. So if you're looking at it from a talent perspective, I still don't think Notre Dame is that close to winning a national title, because not only do you have to beat Clemson one or two times in the regular season, you're going to have to get somebody in the semifinal and somebody in the final. And it's just, there's three teams that are ahead of everybody else, and Notre Dame is in that next tier where you're 4, 5, 6, 7.
They haven't beaten a number one team in 27 years. Does that happen today?
I actually thought Notre Dame would win it going into the week. And with Clemson's 3 injuries up the middle of their defense, I'm not going to change my mind on that. Now, I don't know what I would pick if Trevor Lawrence were playing this game, because he's a generational quarterback. He's the best there is. But I do think that Notre Dame's defense is going to play a very good game, and that Notre Dame will have success running the ball and the determination to run the ball that they don't necessarily have in these big-on-big matchups in past years. And I have Notre Dame winning 27-23.
TP, what say you?
I thought Notre Dame was going to win this game preseason. Had Trevor Lawrence been available today, I likely wouldn't have picked Notre Dame. But I do, and I think Ian Book certainly has to play one of his better games. But to repeat what O'Malley said in terms of what has happened to the Clemson defense, not only the injuries to Tyler Davis at defensive tackle, linebackers Jones and Skalski, but you have to think about Isaiah Simmons from last year. That 3/4 of their secondary. This is a dramatically less effective Clemson defense than what we saw last year at this time. So I'm inclined to, I think it's Notre Dame's time. And I think it's Notre Dame 24, Clemson 23.
And you can subscribe to Irish Illustrated, the #1 source for Notre Dame sports online. Just head to irishillustrated.com and click on Join to find the best plan for you.
Up next, it's our Irish keys to the game, the X Factors, the score predictions, the Four Winds Casino, what to watch for in 2 minutes on the countdown. Back on the countdown, Megan rejoins us. It's time for the Four Winds Casino, what to watch for. We start with our Irish keys to the game, Mr. Skoll.
Chuck, earlier this week, Brian Kelly has downplayed this game. I know it's not as important as the ACC championship or a national championship, but it's the biggest regular season game that Notre Dame has played in the Brian Kelly era. You got to treat it that way. Treat it like it's a huge game. Megan?
They got to treat it like it's a huge game, but they got to stay focused. They can't get wrapped up too much in all of the emotions regarding it. Stay focused, run the plays they're supposed to do, and they should be able to be okay. Chuck?
Told you earlier, Travis Etienne goes off in games like this without Trevor Lawrence. You got to keep him under 175 total yards. X factors, who'd you go with?
Well, one guy who could limit Etienne today is defensive coordinator Clark Lee. He's a mastermind, only allowed 2 touchdowns over the last 3 games on the Notre Dame defense. He's my X factor tonight. Megan?
Going to go with one of Lee's stars in Drew White. He's kind of been consistent this year, between 4 and 6 tackles a game. Look for him to have a bigger game in stopping Travis Etienne. Chuck?
Drew White can't cover Travis Etienne. Kyle Hamilton can. He's the guy that erases all the mistakes in the secondary, and he's got to come up with a big game for the Irish to win this one tonight. Prediction time. Mark, what are you going with?
Chuck, it's been a weird season with predicting what's going to happen with this Notre Dame football team every Saturday, but for some reason, I've got a good feeling about this game. I think Notre Dame's going to win 24-21. Megan?
I've got to go the opposite. I'm going 27-20 Clemson. I just don't see Notre Dame's offense really getting that spark going. Sorry, guys. Chuck?
Look, Trevor Lawrence is out. 3 defensive starters are out. You've got a third-year starting quarterback and a veteran offensive line. If not now, when? The Irish win this one 27-24. Now we turn it over to NBC for their coverage of the Irish and the Tigers. We're back right after the game with highlights and reaction on 16 News Now.